My husband gave me a large, adorable cat, but just one day later, my husband suddenly died of a heart attack. After he passed away, without my knowledge, my mother-in-law secretly threw the cat away, claiming it was carrying a dangerous virus. I was completely shattered. But 2 days later, when I was alone at home, crying in despair, the cat suddenly returned. It ran straight into the backyard garden and began digging frantically at the soil. Driven by curiosity, I helped dig. That was when I froze in shock. My body trembled uncontrollably. Buried beneath the soil was... Before the story begins, please write in the comments section where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe so the Midnight Stories channel can continue to grow and bring you even more gripping tales. Heavy rain poured over the city that afternoon, creating a constant rhythm against the roof of the large house owned by Arthur and Elena. The darkened sky made the interior feel gloomier than usual. Even though the crystal chandeliers in the living room were already lit, Elena sat quietly on the sofa. Her fingers moved slowly over a string of prayer beads. Her lips whispered soft prayers as she waited for her husband to come home. For the past few days, Elena had been plagued by a terrible feeling. Her heart often raced without reason whenever she thought about Arthur. Lately, he looked utterly exhausted. His face was pale, his eyes heavy with a burden he refused to share. The sound of the automatic gate opening snapped Elena out of her thoughts. She stood up at once, straightened her long dress, and walked toward the front door. A black sedan entered the yard, cutting through the pouring rain. Moments later, a figure emerged from the car, holding an umbrella. Something was different. This time, Arthur wasn't carrying his work bag. Instead, in his right arm, he held a large animal carrier covered with cloth. Elena frowned, curiosity mixing with unease. Arthur stepped onto the terrace, his breathing slightly uneven. He set the carrier down on the cold marble floor before greeting his wife and gently kissed her forehead. His hands felt unusually cold. Elena looked at the carrier, then back at her husband. Arthur smiled, but the smile never reached his eyes. He told Elena he had brought her a new companion. Slowly, Arthur opened the door, and out stepped a magnificent creature, a male cat, extraordinarily large, far bigger than an ordinary house cat. Its fur was thick and golden, its tail full and fluffy like a feather duster. The cat moved with elegance, scanning the room with sharp, watchful yellow eyes. Elena stared in awe. She had never seen such a majestic animal in real life. Arthur introduced Leo. Elena asked why he suddenly brought home a cat, especially since they never discussed owning a pet before. Arthur looked at her intently, gripping both her shoulders slightly tighter than usual. In a low, serious voice, he said Leo was not just a pet. He told her that if one day he was no longer at home or had to leave for a very long time, Leo would protect her. The words made Elena's chest tighten. That night, dinner passed in silence. Only the clinking of cutlery against porcelain plates filled the room. Arthur barely ate, pushing his food around while staring blankly at the flower vase on the table. Leo sat calmly on the rug near Arthur's chair, as if standing guard against an unseen threat. The next morning, Elena prepared Arthur's favorite breakfast, trying to act cheerful despite the lingering dread in her heart. Before they could sit down, the doorbell rang repeatedly. Arthur's stepmother, Margaret, entered the house wearing an overly elegant morning dress, gold jewelry gleaming against her skin. She carried a small container of herbal medicine and insisted Arthur drink it. Reluctantly, he did. 10 minutes later, Arthur collapsed. His body convulsed violently. Foam appeared at the corners of his mouth. Elena screamed his name, cradling his head as his eyes widened, trying to convey one last message. He never did. Arthur died that morning. At the hospital, the doctor declared it a massive sudden heart failure. Margaret refused an autopsy. Leo never stopped watching her. And 2 days later, the cat would uncover the truth buried beneath the soil. Elena had locked herself inside the master bedroom. She knelt motionless on the prayer prie-dieu, her swollen eyes endlessly spilling tears. It felt as though half her soul had been torn away by force. The image of Arthur's face, bluish as he drew his final breath, haunted her relentlessly, appearing every time she closed her eyes. In the corner of the room, Leo lay curled up in silence. The large cat had refused to eat or drink since his master passed away. He only stared at the bedroom door with a vacant gaze, as if hoping Arthur would suddenly walk in and call his name. The silence shattered when firm footsteps echoed up the staircase. The bedroom door swung open without a knock. Margaret stood there, her face cold and devoid of any trace of grief. She looked down at the broken Elena with a condescending stare. Then her gaze shifted to Leo, who immediately rose and hissed in alert. Margaret lifted a silk handkerchief to her nose, theatrically, as if a foul stench filled the room. In a sharp, commanding voice, she declared that the house needed to be cleansed of all sources of disease, and the very first source she pointed to was Leo. According to Margaret, the cat was filthy, carried viruses, and could very well have been the cause of Arthur's sudden death, his fur supposedly inhaled into Arthur's lungs. Hearing the absurd accusation, Elena tried to defend herself in a hoarse, trembling voice. She insisted that Leo was a very clean cat, routinely vaccinated, and always well cared for by Arthur. More than that, Leo was her husband's last trust, something she was obligated to protect. Margaret did not care. She stepped closer and snapped at Elena, calling her a foolish wife. She warned Elena to think about her own health if she didn't want to meet a tragic end like Arthur. Margaret claimed she was doing all this for Elena's sake, as her only remaining family. But behind those sweet words lay a vicious plan to eliminate the only guardian she feared in that house. Without waiting for Elena's consent, Margaret clapped her hands twice. 2 large men dressed entirely in black entered the bedroom. They carried an animal capture net and thick gloves. Elena's eyes widened in shock. She sprang to her feet and ran toward them, spreading her arms to shield Leo. She begged through tears, pleading with them not to take Leo away. She cried out God's name, begging her mother-in-law for mercy. Margaret, however, coldly ordered the men to remove Elena first. One of the men grabbed Elena roughly and dragged her away from the corner where Leo stood. Elena struggled with all her strength, but her body, drained by grief, was no match for the man's power. Seeing Elena being hurt, Leo reacted instantly. The wild instinct of the Maine Coon surged forth. He leapt at the man holding the net, slashing his face with sharp claws and leaving long red gashes. The man screamed in pain and cursed loudly. Chaos erupted in the room. Leo darted agilely across the furniture, knocking over flower vases and the framed wedding photo of Elena and Arthur, which shattered across the floor. The sound of breaking glass mixed with Elena's hysterical screams and the men's harsh shouts, creating a horrifying uproar. Leo fought desperately. He hissed and clawed at anyone who came near, as if he knew that once captured, he would never return to protect his mistress again. But his space grew narrower. The second man managed to corner Leo beneath the vanity table. With a swift motion, the thick net was thrown, covering Leo's large body. The cat struggled violently, crying out in a heart-wrenching wail, as if calling Elena to save him. Elena's heart shattered into pieces watching her husband's beloved cat treated like a dangerous wild beast. She fought to break free, biting the man restraining her until he released her. She ran after them as they dragged Leo out of the room. Elena managed to grab the edge of the net, but Margaret kicked her hand away. Leo was forcibly shoved into a narrow, dark animal carrier placed in the trunk of a van waiting outside. Elena ran barefoot to the front terrace. Tears soaked her cheeks and her shawl hung in disarray. She watched the van speed away, carrying off the only living memory Arthur had left behind. Elena collapsed onto the hot asphalt, sobbing uncontrollably as she screamed Leo's name. From the doorway, Margaret stood with her arms crossed, watching Elena with a thin, victorious smile. She remarked smugly that the house was finally clean and that Elena should be grateful. Then she drove off in her luxury car, leaving Elena alone in a silence that felt even more suffocating. That night, Elena could not sleep at all. She cleaned the wreckage of her bedroom by herself. Every shard of glass from the broken photo frame pierced her heart. She noticed deep claw marks on the doorframe, silent evidence of Leo's futile struggle. She clutched Arthur's pillow, inhaling the fading scent of her husband, and apologized again and again. She felt utterly powerless against Margaret's ruthless dominance. Yet amid her despair, a small resolve began to grow. She could not keep crying forever. Arthur had once said that Leo was no ordinary cat, and Margaret's obsessive determination to remove Leo planted a new suspicion in Elena's mind. Why would a woman be so afraid of a cat? A faint rustling sound was heard for a moment. Then Arthur's voice emerged. It sounded weary and hoarse, yet still calm. Hearing her husband's voice again made Elena break down uncontrollably. She clutched the recorder tightly to her chest, listening to every word Arthur spoke as if he were sitting right beside her at that very moment. In the recording, Arthur spoke at length. He revealed a dark family secret he had kept tightly hidden from Elena so she wouldn't worry. He explained that his father's death 2 years ago followed the same pattern as what was happening to him now. His father had died suddenly of a heart attack after regularly consuming an herbal tonic prepared by Margaret. At the time, Arthur had no proof, but his suspicions never faded. Arthur explained that Margaret was drowning in massive debt, amounting to billions of dollars due to her addiction to fraudulent investment schemes promising instant returns. Debt collectors frequently terrorized her, and the only way for her to pay them off and maintain her luxurious lifestyle was by taking control of Arthur's family inheritance. Arthur was the final obstacle standing in her way, and that was why he had to be eliminated. Arthur also gave very specific instructions in the recording. He warned Elena not to go to the police alone because Margaret had extensive connections and was skilled at twisting the truth. He told Elena to contact Mr. Henry, his late father's longtime friend and a senior lawyer known for his integrity. Arthur said the contact information was written on the back of their wedding photograph, which was also inside the box. "Elena, my righteous wife," Arthur's voice trembled at the end of the recording. "I'm sorry I can't stay with you any longer. I've tried to hold on, but the poison has already destroyed my organs too badly. You must be strong. Don't believe Margaret's tears. She's a brilliant actress. Leo will protect you. That cat knows who is evil. Run from this house if you feel unsafe, or fight her with intelligence. I love you, in this world and the next." The recording ended. Silence filled the room once again, but this time it felt different. It was no longer the silence of surrendering grief, but the silence before a storm. Elena wiped her tears away roughly. The sorrow that had dominated her heart slowly transformed into a burning rage. She imagined Margaret's sweet smile as she handed Arthur the glass of poisoned herbal drink. She imagined the cruelty of a woman who had taken 2 lives, her husband and her stepson, just for paper money she could never take to the grave. Elena looked at Leo. The cat stared back at her, its yellow eyes gleaming as if lending her strength. Elena realized she could not afford to be weak. If she broke now, Arthur's death would be meaningless, and she would be the next victim. She gathered all the documents and put them back into the metal box. She needed to hide them somewhere Margaret would never think to look. Elena scanned her bedroom. The wardrobe was too obvious. Under the bed was too common. Her gaze landed on the central AC vent in the ceiling, covered by a metal grill. Using a chair and a table, Elena climbed up. With no screwdriver available, she loosened the screws using the tip of her nail scissors, then pushed the metal box deep into the dark, dusty air duct. After making sure it couldn't be seen from outside, she reattached the grill. Her breathing was heavy, but she felt slightly relieved. The evidence of Margaret's crimes was now safe. That night, Elena did not sleep on the bed. She sat on the floor, leaning against the wall beside the wardrobe, hugging her knees with Leo asleep on her lap. Her eyes remained fixed on the bedroom door. Every gust of wind or creaking sound made her nerves tighten. She knew that starting tomorrow morning, she would have to play the biggest role of her life. She would pretend to be a foolish, naive, and fragile daughter-in-law in front of her husband's killer. She would suppress her disgust and rage to trap that devil of a woman. She made a vow to herself and to her husband's spirit. She would make Margaret pay for every drop of poison she gave Arthur. Justice had to be served, and Elena, by God's help, and her golden-furred guardian, would be its executor. Morning sunlight streamed through the gaps in the curtains, bringing the promise of a bright new day that contrasted cruelly with the darkness in Elena's heart. Elena woke with a stiff neck after sleeping upright on the floor. Leo had already woken up and was sitting on the windowsill watching birds chirping in the garden. Elena stood up, her body aching, but her resolve as hard as steel. She stared at her reflection in the vanity mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen, dark circles clearly visible. Even without makeup, she looked like a woman shattered by depression. She decided to use it. She would wear the mask of a broken wife to deceive her enemy. Elena showered and changed into a loose, plain black dress. She deliberately didn't arrange her shawl too neatly, letting parts of it look wrinkled to give the impression that she no longer cared about herself. When she went downstairs, she was startled by the scene in the living room. Several large, expensive-looking suitcases were stacked near the entrance. Margaret's voice echoed loudly from the kitchen, barking orders at the housemaid. Elena took a deep breath, whispered a prayer for strength, and slowly walked toward the voice. Her heart pounded violently. Every cell in her body screamed to either run or attack, but she held herself back. In the kitchen, Margaret stood with her hands on her hips, pointing angrily at the open refrigerator, scolding the housemaid for not stocking her favorite imported fruits. The moment she saw Elena, her expression changed instantly. A sweet, artificial smile appeared as she rushed forward, wrapping Elena in a tight embrace and stroking her back. The sharp scent of Margaret's expensive perfume made Elena nauseated. It reminded her of the smell of death that clung to this house. Margaret spoke in a tone of exaggerated concern, saying she had decided to move into this house temporarily to keep Elena company. She claimed she couldn't bear to let Elena drown in grief without family support. Elena merely nodded weakly, saying very little. She let Margaret hug her, while her own hands clenched tightly beneath her dress until her nails turned white. She whispered a barely audible thank you, playing her role perfectly. Margaret was satisfied. In her twisted mind, Elena was nothing more than a foolish lamb being led to slaughter. Then, Margaret took control of the dining table, sitting in the head chair once occupied by Arthur. She began discussing the management of the house and Arthur's assets. She said Elena didn't need to trouble herself with complicated company matters. Margaret would handle everything with her legal team, which were, of course, her accomplices. Elena nodded again, pretending not to understand and showing no interest in money. That afternoon, while Margaret took a nap in the luxurious guest room she had claimed as her own, Elena made her move. The day before the box was discovered, Elena had ordered several mini CCTV cameras disguised as everyday items from an online store to monitor Leo. The package had arrived that morning, the courier left it at the security post, and Elena retrieved it quietly through the side door. She opened the package in the locked bathroom. There were 3 cameras, one disguised as a digital clock, one as a clothes hanger, and one as a phone charger adapter. Working quickly and carefully, Elena installed them in strategic locations. The clock camera went into Arthur's study, where Margaret would surely search for important documents. The hanger camera was placed in the living room, facing the stairs and front door. The charger camera was installed in the kitchen, where food and drinks were prepared. Elena connected all the cameras to a hidden app on her phone. Her heart raced with fear that Margaret might wake up and catch her. Fortunately, the woman slept soundly, perhaps exhausted after a full day of acting. Leo followed Elena everywhere, like a personal bodyguard, ensuring the area was safe before she acted. That night, the atmosphere in the house grew even more oppressive. Rain fell again, adding to the horror of the massive house. Margaret and Elena ate dinner together in awkward silence. Margaret watched Elena closely, probing for weaknesses. She asked whether Arthur had ever entrusted Elena with documents or a safe key. Elena answered blankly, saying Arthur never discussed work with her and she knew nothing about any safe. Margaret clicked her tongue softly, irritation flashing across her face before she hid it. After dinner, Elena excused herself early, claiming she had a headache. She brought Leo into her room and locked the door. But she didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed, watching her phone screen. Through the hidden camera in Arthur's study, she saw Margaret enter the room around 11 p.m. The woman no longer wore her mask of kindness. Her face looked vicious, filled with greed. She rummaged through Arthur's desk drawers, throwing documents onto the floor aggressively. She kicked Arthur's office chair in anger, then pulled out her phone and called someone, shouting furiously. Although the CCTV didn't record clear audio, Elena could read Margaret's lips as she mouthed words like idiot and finish her. Elena's blood ran cold. Suddenly, she heard real footsteps in the hallway outside. He landed squarely in the middle of the coffee table, smashing into the tray and the ceramic teapot. Crash! The sound of shattering porcelain exploded through the room, sharp and ear-splitting. The cup in Elena's hand was struck by Leo's massive body, flying from her grip and shattering across the marble floor. The hot liquid splashed everywhere, soaking the expensive carpet and the hem of Elena's black dress. Leo didn't stop there. The cat hissed violently at Margaret, his fur bristling, fangs bared in a feral warning. Margaret's reaction was completely unexpected. Her face flushed crimson as her rage detonated instantly. She stood up and screamed hysterically, hurling filthy curses at Leo, words utterly unbecoming of a so-called respectable woman. She snatched a rolled-up magazine and swung it at him. But Leo was faster. He leapt backward, dodging the blow, continuing to growl low and deep, a clear threat. Still in shock, Elena stared at the broken cup on the floor. Then she noticed something chilling. On the white marble where the herbal drink had spilled, small white bubbles began to form. The surface of the marble dulled as if it had been splashed with corrosive acid. That wasn't tea. It was poison. Elena stood up. Survival instinct took over. She looked at Margaret, who was still screaming and cursing at the cat. In a calm but icy voice, Elena asked why Margaret was so furious over a single spilled cup of tea. She pointed to the bubbling floor. "Look at the marble," Elena said quietly. "Why would herbal tea cause the floor to blister like that? What did you really put in my drink?" The question hung in the air, freezing the room. Margaret fell silent. The magazine slipped lower in her hand. Slowly, she turned toward Elena, and for the first time, the mask truly fell. There was no sweet smile, no pretense, only pure hatred. Margaret let out a small laugh, dry, hollow, terrifying. She didn't deny it. Instead, she stepped forward, her high heels crunching over broken ceramic shards. She said Elena wasn't as stupid as she had thought. She admitted she intended to send Elena to join Arthur. According to her, Elena was a parasite, an obstacle standing between her and what was rightfully hers. Margaret claimed the family fortune should belong to her as compensation for the years she spent caring for Arthur's sickly father. She believed she had every right to reclaim what she said Arthur and Elena had stolen from her. The confession spilled out freely, fueled by arrogant confidence. Margaret was certain Elena had nowhere to run. Elena stepped backward, one step at a time. Her hand searched the pocket of her dress, making sure her phone was still there. She needed to record this or call for help. But Margaret moved faster. She noticed the movement. With brutal force, Margaret slapped Elena's hand away and shoved her, sending Elena crashing onto the sofa. She leaned in, her face only inches away, eyes wide and unhinged. She threatened that if Elena tried anything or dared go to the police without proof, she would ensure Elena died in a way far more painful than poison. That was when Leo struck again. The cat leapt onto Margaret's back, claws tearing into the shoulder of her expensive blouse. Margaret screamed in agony and released Elena, spinning wildly as she tried to shake Leo off. The chaos gave Elena her chance. She didn't run outside. The front door was locked, and Margaret had the key. Instead, she grabbed a large shard of the broken cup, still wet with poisonous residue. She wrapped it quickly in thick tissues from the table and shoved it into her pocket. Physical evidence. Then she ran upstairs toward her bedroom, calling for Leo. The cat jumped off Margaret's back and followed her. Once inside the room, Elena locked the door and shoved a small cabinet against it. Her breathing was ragged. Downstairs, she heard Margaret screaming and smashing objects in frustration. Elena looked at the ceramic shard in her hand. The liquid was still wet. This was the key to putting that devil of a woman behind bars. But first, she had to survive. She checked her phone. No signal, not a single bar. Horror washed over her. Margaret must have activated a signal jammer or cut the landline. Elena was completely isolated inside the mansion with a killer who no longer had any reason to hide. The night grew deeper. Outside, the storm raged harder. Violent winds slammed against the bedroom windows, creating terrifying, thunderous roars. Inside, Elena curled up in the corner, hugging her knees. Leo sat upright beside her, ears twitching wildly at every sound. Suddenly, the bedroom lights flickered once, twice, then died. Total darkness swallowed the room. Through the gap under the door, Elena saw the hallway's lights go out too. The entire house had been plunged into darkness. This wasn't a scheduled blackout. Elena was certain of it. Margaret had shut off the main breaker, turning the house into a hunting ground designed favoring the predator. Elena held her breath, eyes straining to adjust. Lightning flashed occasionally, illuminating the room in brief, horrifying snapshots, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. In the silence between thunderclaps, heavy footsteps echoed on the wooden staircase. Thud, thud, thud. Slow, deliberate. The sound of psychological terror. Then came the scrape of metal being dragged across the floor, harsh, bone-grinding. Elena imagined it was Arthur's metal baseball bat from the storage room, or worse, a large butcher knife from the kitchen. Margaret's voice echoed through the dark hallway. It no longer sounded sane. She was softly singing, an old song, off-key and grotesque. "Elena, sweetheart, come out. Don't play hide and seek with Mommy." The tone was sweet, poisoned. Elena clamped her mouth over her mouth. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She knew the door wouldn't hold long if Margaret attacked it with a weapon. She had to move. She couldn't die here like a rat in a hole. She had to reach the family room downstairs, the place where she had prepared her final trap. But to get there, she would have to pass Margaret. The bedroom door slammed violently. The chair and cabinet blocking it shifted. "Open the door, Elena. Hiding is pointless. No one is coming tonight. The security guards are asleep. The rain is too loud for anyone to hear you scream." With a dismissive tone, Margaret answered that Arthur's only crime was being born and breathing. She began to ramble, pouring out years of bottled-up resentment. She screamed that she had been forced to pretend to be a good mother to an ungrateful stepchild who never knew his place. She admitted that she had married Arthur's father purely for money, to cover the massive debts from her fraudulent investment schemes, debts that had piled up into millions of dollars. She believed she was entitled to every cent of the family's wealth as compensation for the youth she had sacrificed caring for Arthur's chronically ill father. Elena continued provoking her, stepping back little by little to keep her distance, yet staying within the camera's range. Elena then asked about Arthur's father. Was her father-in-law's death 2 years ago also Margaret's doing? That question made Margaret pause. Her face shifted into a horrifying expression of pride. Loudly, Margaret confessed to everything. She said the old man had taken too long to die, so she helped him along, with a special herbal mixture added to his nightly drink, exactly the same way she had done to Arthur. She described in detail how easy it had been to eliminate both of them because they trusted her completely. The confession flowed effortlessly, without the slightest trace of guilt, as if murdering people were nothing more than routine household chores. Online, thousands of comments flooded the live stream feed, unseen by either Elena or Margaret. Horrified viewers began calling the police, tagging law enforcement accounts, and recording the confession. The audience count skyrocketed from hundreds to tens of thousands within minutes as social media algorithms amplified the horrifying broadcast. But inside that living room, Elena stood alone, face to face with death. Margaret, convinced she had already won, seeing Elena cornered and isolated, finally decided to end her charade. She raised her knife high, her eyes locked onto Elena's neck. She shouted that once Elena was dead, she would fabricate a story claiming Elena had committed suicide due to depression after losing her husband, and that all the wealth would fall into her hands with nothing left to stop her. Margaret lunged forward with shocking speed. Elena screamed and tried to dodge sideways, but the hem of her long dress caught on a table leg, sending her crashing to the floor. Margaret stood over her, ready to drive the knife down. Elena closed her eyes, whispered the name of God, and surrendered, accepting that this might be the end of her life. But at that critical second, a large black shadow shot out from behind the sofa like a bullet. Leo. The Maine Coon cat leaped with full force, not as a pampered pet, but as a fierce, protective predator. Leo landed squarely on Margaret's face. All 4 paws, armed with razor-sharp claws, dug into her skin and shoulders. Margaret screamed in agony, her shrill cry piercing through the storm. Her balance faltered. The knife flew from her hand, skidding into the far corner of the room. She tried desperately to pull Leo off her face, but the massive 10-kilogram cat clung stubbornly, biting and clawing anything within reach. Blood began streaming down Margaret's face. She staggered backward, crashing into a decorative table. A large flower vase toppled and shattered into countless pieces. Leo finally jumped off after delivering his devastating attack. He stood in front of Elena, back arched, fur bristling, emitting a low growl that sounded like the roar of a small tiger.
Margaret collapsed into a sitting position, clutching her ruined face. She cried and cursed, blindly groping across the floor for her knife, her vision obscured by blood. Seeing the opportunity, Elena scrambled to her feet, grabbed the knife, and threw it far beneath a cabinet where it was difficult to reach. She backed away, clutching Leo, who remained tense and alert. As Margaret attempted to rise again in blind rage, the sound of sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer by the second. Blue and red lights flickered through the windows, reflecting off the living room walls. A loud crash echoed from the front door. Bang! The solid wooden door was forcibly breached from outside. A team of heavily armed police officers stormed in, followed by Mr. Henderson, Arthur's lawyer, his face pale as death. It turned out that one of the live stream viewers was a member of Henderson's staff who had immediately reported the incident. The police aimed their weapons at Margaret, who was still covered in blood and looked utterly deranged. Shouts ordering her to lie face down filled the room. Margaret froze. Her breathing was ragged as her eyes darted wildly around, until they landed on the phone sitting on the bookshelf. The screen was still glowing, showing her own face and thousands of hateful comments scrolling rapidly. Margaret realized something more painful than Leo's claws. The entire world had just seen her true face. She was finished. The storm had subsided, leaving behind a light drizzle that dampened the front yard, now crowded with police vehicles and curious neighbors. Yellow police tape stretched across the entrance of the luxurious house. Elena sat on the front porch, wrapped in a thick blanket provided by the medical team. Leo sat calmly in her lap, licking his slightly dirty paws, as if he had just completed a routine patrol, not saved his owner's life from murder. Mr. Henderson sat beside Elena, handing her a bottle of water and gently patting her shoulder in support. Elena stared blankly at the police car where Margaret was being escorted out in handcuffs. Her appearance was utterly destroyed. Her face was partially bandaged from Leo's attack, her hair disheveled, and her expensive dress was filthy. There was no trace left of the arrogance she once flaunted. She walked with her head down, avoiding the glare of journalists' cameras gathered outside the gate. Just before being shoved into the patrol car, Margaret glanced towards the porch. Her eyes met Elena's, then shifted to Leo's piercing yellow gaze staring back at her from a distance. Margaret screamed hysterically, ranting about a demon cat and Arthur's ghost, thrashing like someone who had completely lost her sanity, before officers finally forced her into the vehicle. The days that followed became a whirlwind of exhausting legal proceedings for Elena, yet she endured them with extraordinary resilience. Thanks to overwhelming evidence, arsenic lab results, Arthur's voice recordings, a safe containing fraud documents, and most damning of all, the live-streamed confession, the legal process moved swiftly. Police exhumed the bodies of Arthur and his father. Autopsies confirmed the presence of the same poison in both, upgrading the charges against Margaret to double premeditated murder. In court, Margaret attempted to plead insanity to avoid punishment. However, expert testimony and her digital gambling and financial records proved that she had committed every crime consciously and deliberately for money. The judge handed down the maximum sentence, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Karma did not stop there. All of Margaret's assets were seized by the state and banks to settle her fraudulent investment debts. The woman who once worshipped luxury would now spend the rest of her life behind cold, narrow prison bars. According to Mr. Henderson, Margaret frequently suffered severe paranoia in prison. She became terrified whenever she saw stray cats wandering near the facility, screaming for help and believing they were Arthur's incarnations coming for revenge. Her once prized beauty was now scarred beyond healing, a permanent reminder of her crimes. 6 months passed since that horrific night. Seasons changed, and flowers began to bloom again in the garden behind Elena's house. The house no longer felt haunted or sorrowful. Elena had renovated parts of it, discarding all of Margaret's belongings and replacing them with a brighter, warmer atmosphere. Now fully in control of Arthur's company and charitable foundation, Elena had grown into a strong yet compassionate businesswoman. She devoted much of her wealth to building shelters for orphans and rescue centers for abandoned animals, fulfilling Arthur's wishes written in his diary. That afternoon, the sky glowed golden orange. Elena sat on a garden bench under the old mango tree where the secret box had once been found. She read a book while enjoying the evening breeze. Beside her stood a small, beautiful gravestone engraved with Arthur's name, a memorial she had built in their favorite place. Elena closed her book, gazed at the sky, and smiled faintly. She felt relieved. The heavy burden had been lifted, justice had been served, and she knew Arthur could now rest in peace. Suddenly, a familiar weight settled onto her lap. Leo jumped up, purring deeply as he rubbed his head against Elena's hand. The large cat looked healthier than ever. His golden fur shimmered in the sunlight, and the leg that once limped had fully healed. Leo had become a social media celebrity, known as a heroic cat, but to Elena, Leo was far more than a pet. He was a part of Arthur's soul left behind for her. Elena wrapped her arms around Leo's neck, burying her face in his thick fur. "Thank you, Leo," she whispered softly. "We did it. Arthur would be so proud of you." Leo let out a low, dignified meow and closed his eyes, enjoying her touch.